VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, thank you for joining us today here on Crosstalk on the VCY America Network. We are just a week past the presidential election. Today, we're going to take a look at the impact of this 2012 election on LGBT issues, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And I can't think of anybody better to talk to on the issue than Peter LaBarbera, president of Americans for Truth About Homosexuality. Peter, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Thanks for the opportunity.
Peter, I have got so many items for us to talk about, but so we're going to get right into it here today. It was, of course, just a week ago, the presidential election. You sent forth a press release afterwards. You called this a, quote, devastating day for pro-family advocates. Tell us why.
Well, it sure was. We lost on in four states on the homosexual marriage issue, Jim, and it was just astonishing. The states of Maine, Minnesota, and Maine, Washington State, and Maryland all voted in homosexual so-called marriage for the first time, and the state of Minnesota voted down a traditional marriage amendment that would have banned homosexual so-called marriage.
This is the first time we saw voters actually turn it down.
Yes.
Or voted in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's the first, we always used to say that homosexual so-called marriage had never been voted in, but we can't say that anymore. In addition to that, we had states like your own state there in Wisconsin, which elected a radical lesbian pro-abortion feminist named Tammy Baldwin, and other open homosexuals being elected. And this is part of a national strategy to elect openly homosexual candidates, mostly Democrats. We have our first bisexual atheist, Jim, which I'm sure you're happy to know, from Arizona. So now we have an open bisexual in Congress. And it just seems that the homosexual side has all the momentum, while the traditional pro-Christian natural marriage side is really hurting right now.
Well, Peter, this is very interesting here, as you brought up Tammy Baldwin, as she is the first openly gay U.S. senator. And I tell you, within moments of her announced victory, I mean, their press releases were going forth from activist homosexual groups lauding her election to Congress. We understand she had a key position with the LGBT caucus in Congress as she served in there, one of the very liberal voting records taking place there as well. But this is a significant milestone now to have the first openly homosexual senator, lesbian, that's been put into the United States Senate.
Yeah, and think about all us great people outside of your state in Wisconsin, Jim. We had gotten used to Wisconsin sort of giving Americans hope with the various elections and the surprising victory and the recall, or maybe it wasn't so surprising, but it was nice to know that the governor who's done so much for the people of the state survived the recall. And then all of a sudden, I wake up to the news or look on the TV and see that Tammy Baldwin, a radical homosexual and pro-abortion, of course, and feminists, everything's on the left in her policies, was now elected senator in Wisconsin, and it was quite shocking.
Well, the Human Rights Campaign, which is what they call themselves, the largest civil rights organization working to achieve lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender equality, they celebrated this. They attribute part of this to ensure her victory. They said they raised and contributed to well over $500,000 for her campaign. And they said Tammy Baldwin is, quote, a role model for LGBT youth and young women across the country.
Well, the Human Rights Campaign should be called the Human Wrongs Campaign. It's a homosexual pressure group. We would expect them to be celebrating Tammy Baldwin's victory, but she's hardly a role model for young women. We want women to embrace marriage and healthy, wholesome behaviors, not lesbianism. And her policies are to the far left. She's pro-abortion. In so many ways, she represents what's wrong with the left. And now she's going to be in the Senate for 6 years, And I've heard, and you could confirm this, Jim, I've heard she's a very effective politician in terms of, constituent service and that sort of thing. So it might be very difficult to unseat her if she's that good at politics.
Well, although she only had, in her many terms of Congress, only had 3 bills that she introduced that actually were passed. Peter,
Can I say one more thing about her, Jim? She spoke at a National Gay and Lesbian Task Force conference that was right there in Milwaukee, which was extremely radical, which advocated behaviors we can't even talk about on a pro-family show. That's how radical it was, and yet she spoke there and was one of their celebrated speakers. And so, again, we see the lack of accountability on the left. The left can do anything it wants, no accountability, no pressure from the media or focus on what they do. Meanwhile, if there's any mistake on the right, all of a sudden there's tons of media attention, and that's a sort of bias that we have to somehow work through in our country.
Well, what's also interesting to note, Peter, is that her opponent in this race was Tommy Thompson. And on the evening that Tammy Baldwin spoke before the Democratic National Convention on Heartland Values, a Thompson campaign individual had sent out a tweet of Tammy Baldwin dancing at a gay pride event. And yet it was the staffer here that was chastised for his sending out such a tweet that really showed the kind of values that Tammy Baldwin has. Yes,
absolutely. And again, this is really troubling when the Republican Party starts taking the position that we can't even focus or even let the people know about some of the radical positions and affiliations of the left. People like Tammy Baldwin dancing, celebrating at a homosexual pride event with untold, I've covered these things in the past, Jim. There's untold lewdness and crudeness and vulgarity at these events. They're inappropriate places for children because sometimes there's even open nudity. And here is your U.S. Senator now dancing and celebrating at this event. Obviously, if more people in Wisconsin had known that this is the kind of woman it was on the ballot, they might not have voted for her. But there is a blockade against any negative news, against politically incorrect, alerting the people on this, and it's very troubling because there's a total double standard, and it's probably worth 10 to 15 points in an election, just the media bias alone.
Let's take a look at another race, Peter, that you are following, and that's in Iowa at the Supreme Court level there with Judge David Wiggins.
Yes, Judge David Wiggins, sad to say, was one of the Supreme Court justices that voted unanimously to impose so-called homosexual marriage, and I say so-called because it's obviously not marriage. 2 men or 2 women cannot get married in the eyes of God, at least. He was one of the 7 judges that imposed that homosexual marriage on the people of Iowa. Was that in 2009, Jim?
I don't recall the exact year.
I think it was 2009. Remember, Iowa had gay marriage, and then 3 in the subsequent election in Iowa, 3 of those judges were recalled or were not retained in a pro-family campaign. Well, this was to be the 4th judge, Judge Wiggins, but in the election on Tuesday, Judge Wiggins survived the recall effort. He's the first of the 7 judges, of the 4 at least, that were put up for a vote. He's the first to survive a bid to recall him. And again, that's more sad news for marriage. The homosexual activists have learned how to win on this issue, and the way they're winning is they're talking about love and relationships and all these moral-sounding, conservative-sounding talking points, and they're confusing people, and they're even confusing a lot of Christians.
Peter LaBarbera is with us today from Americans for Truth about homosexuality. And Peter, I guess if there was a bright spot in the election, it happened in the state of Kansas, specifically the cities of Salina, Kansas, and Hutchinson, Kansas, which turned back the so-called bathroom bills, the sexual orientation and gender identity ordinances. In Salina, Kansas, it was repealed and totally rejected in Hutchinson, Kansas as well. And so protections that are given there on behalf of family values. Peter, in your press release after the election, you spoke of a passion gap or a boldness gap between LGBT activists and their pro-family opponents. What did you mean by that?
Well, kind of what I alluded to earlier, Jim. You see all the momentum and the energy and the money, frankly, is on the gay side, the so-called gay side. And you see pro-family people and groups like the National Organization for Marriage trying to make a defense, and yet there's so much ambivalence, even among Christians. And it's shameful that Christians even now are getting confused on issues that are so clear in the Bible. Homosexual marriage, really? I mean, marriage is a picture of the love between Christ and his church. The idea of homosexual marriage is a complete blasphemy, and you would think that most Christians, the vast majority, would get it and not affirm such positions. But sadly, I think our society is de-Christianizing. It's becoming more secular. A recent study showed that a shocking number, I can't remember the exact percentage, of Americans are now unchurched. And so you see, in such an environment in which basically you're seeing a civilization's moral decline, the secular forces, the sort of the sin movement, which is homosexual rights, has more momentum. And it's, unless we see revival in this country, we're going to see more of this, where the side of sin, of evil, the pro-homosexual side, has more energy than the side of good, which is the defense of marriage.
And then, Peter, looking at the very top of the ticket, of course, Barack Obama, reelected to victory. And in your release, you called him the most pro-homosexual president in U.S. history.
Oh, by far, Jim. And I know that's not telling you anything you don't know. Obviously, President Obama has sold his soul, as it were, to this movement. He's pandered to the homosexual lobby like nobody's business. He signed hate crimes into law. He drove the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy on homosexuals in the military, which effectively turns the Pentagon into the world's largest pro-gay organization. The most tragic thing that he did, I believe, he deceived the voters on so-called homosexual marriage, Jim. Remember that, who was the pastor, Rick Warren, where he solemnly said that he believed God was in the mix, and that's why he didn't support homosexual marriage. You know, he made it sound like it was for religious reasons, and then he just flipped his position a few months ago, just in time for the election, so he could get all the rush of gay money, homosexual, big money into his campaign, on that issue. He also did ads. He did pro-gay ads during the campaign, Jim, and he appointed more openly homosexual, bisexual, and transgender appointees than any other president in history.
Wow. Well, Peter, more to come, and I'd like to talk about some of those issues, but let me ask you this. What we saw in these marriage amendments and so on, is this whole debate, is it just about defending marriage, or is there a bigger issue here?
Well, I think the issue is homosexuality, and I think some on our side have tried to, maybe cut corners or make the debate a little bit more palatable by saying it's only about defending marriage, but obviously it's much more than that. It's about defending groups like the Boy Scouts' right to have their own moral creed. It's about the homosexualization of our schools being turned into gay propaganda centers. It's about homosexuals in the military. It's really about so much more than just defending marriage. That's one part of the overarching homosexual agenda, which is all about forcing Americans, using government power where they can and corporate power, forcing Americans to accept homosexuality.
Peter LaBarbera is our guest. We're going to take a quick break, and folks, when we come back, we're going to take a look at new pressure that is being asserted upon the president to go even further on his agenda in the second term to promote LGBT activist issues. You're listening to Crosstalk here on the VCY America Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what's a living fossil?
Chris, a living fossil is a creature that was formerly known only from its fossils and thought to have gone extinct long ago according to evolution, but recently found alive. The best example of this is the coelacanth, the deep-sea fish. Evolutionists thought it died out about 70 million years ago, but it was found alive. Of course, I don't agree with that date. I believe that the fossils were buried during the Great Flood of Noah's day. There's an interesting lesson we can learn. We don't find human bones buried with the coelacanths, even though they lived together before the flood and they live together now. The same with humans and dinosaurs. The point is, just because you don't find their fossils together doesn't mean they didn't live at the same time. Chris, the nature of the flood would explain the fossils. That's the flood we read about when we go back to Genesis.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. For more info on Genesis, visit us on the web at www.icr.org.
listening to Crosstalk on the VCY American Network. Our guest today is Peter LaBarbera, president of Americans for Truth About Homosexuality. We're looking at the 2012 election and the impact of that election on LGBT issues. Peter, in less than 1 week after the election, The Hill is reporting that homosexual rights advocates are pushing President Obama to go big on their agenda in his second term. And my comment was, well, as if he hadn't gone big in his first term. But they're wanting the president now to sign an executive order that would ban discrimination by federal contractors against gay and transgendered people. They said this moves so much faster than legislation because it only needs a stroke of the president's pen.
Yes, and sadly, I think we can probably expect President Obama to do this. What they're calling for is basically the what we call the ENDA, and Jim, we've had many discussions about this over the years. Mm-hmm. ENDA being the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which would be a federal so-called non-discrimination policy pro-homosexual. What they're calling on Obama to do is to do that by executive order. And the reason I'm so pessimistic in assuming that this is going to be done is we've already seen Obama using the executive order not just on homosexual-related issues, but all kinds of issues, from immigration to, all the various issues where he's abused his constitutional powers and he's just enacted policies by edict. And, I'm sad that this was hardly debated in the campaign. I don't know what Romney was thinking, but I think in the zeal to make this race only about economics, it seems a lot of these issues weren't even debated, Jim.
Well, Peter, the belief is that if he does do this, if he signs this executive order to ban discrimination, by federal contractors, that this then is going to cause Congress to pass ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act.
It might do that, but the other thing it's going to do, it's going to create enormous pressure within the Beltway for these corporations to all affirm their homosexual policies. Of course, many big corporate companies Fortune 500 companies have already promoted homosexuality officially in their corporate policies, and I guess we're going to be talking about that later on. But, it's all about using power to pressure people and businesses to adopt pro-homosexual policies. And I always tell people, if you want to understand the gay movement, just think about affirmation. They're looking to affirm their lifestyle. Deep down, I believe that many homosexuals know that their lifestyle is wrong, that it's against God's will, but they have to try to validate their choice that they've made, and so they're always pushing for acceptance. And I think that drives a lot of this, Jim.
WND carried an article last week that talked about all these states adopting homosexual marriage, that now, since they've done this, now we're going to come to lawsuits. Lawsuits against churches, lawsuits against justices of the peace or other officials, lawsuits against small businesses such as photographers, venue operators, cake bakers. What's your response to that?
Well, Jim, we've got it right here in Illinois. We've got the Walders, who run a beautiful bed and breakfast in Paxton, Illinois, outside Champaign, population 4,600, a small town, right after civil unions was passed. Now, this wasn't gay marriage. It was basically gay marriage so-called by another name, civil unions. Right after it was passed, you saw that two homosexual men decided that they wanted to have their civil union ceremony. They asked two bed and breakfasts to do it. They probably did it intentionally so they could have a lawsuit. The Walders bed and breakfast said, no, we don't want to have a civil union ceremony. They don't believe in homosexuality. They're Christians. They believe homosexual practice is a sin. But now they face years of litigation just to preserve their right not to have a civil union, a homosexual ceremony celebrated on their own private business property, Jim. And this is why we have to get Christians to understand the homosexual movement is in the vanguard of leading the charge that oppresses people's right to live by their own religious beliefs.
Well, Peter, also we've seen the lawsuits against the photographers, against cake bakers, against those who hold property for, as we mentioned, different venues, who have said, no, we're not going to use our talents, our abilities to promote homosexuality. We're not going to bake a cake from our bakery for a quote-unquote same-sex marriage ceremony. But, Peter, we're just going to see lawsuits like this multiplied over and over again.
Yes, we are, and I think some good people will be intimidated, and it's very sad. But the position of the homosexual lobby, as I understand it, as shocking as it is, Jim, in a country that was founded on our people's fight for religious freedom. They were fleeing religious tyranny abroad from Europe. They came to the United States for religious freedom, but the position of the homosexual movement is that their so-called gay rights, this newfangled thing that's from the last few decades that we're calling gay rights, that somehow that supersedes Americans' religious freedom, their right to live by their own freedom of conscience, what they believe about sex and marriage and the Bible. And this is the position of the homosexual lobby, and it's shocking that it's gotten this far.
And folks, no doubt we're heading toward a big national collision course as well on this issue, as we have states that are enacting this. We have the federal government that has DOMA on the books, but the Obama administration not defending DOMA, wants to see DOMA overturned, the Defense of Marriage Act. And the Supreme Court will soon be deciding whether they're going to be picking up some of these varied ruling cases here in the near future or not. And but we're coming to a national collision on this very issue.
And Tim, a lot of people are talking pessimistically about what's going to happen in the court, especially following these victories in the 4 states.
Last Friday, Peter, FoxNews.com ran a story that's in the midst of California being very cash-strapped, yet they found money to fund what they say is a much-needed service to the residents living in San Francisco, sex changes. The gender-switching surgeries are part of a comprehensive program for treating transgender people, saying it will help ease mental anguish of people who feel they're trapped in bodies of the wrong gender. Peter, how far is this going to go? I mean, taxpayers having to foot this bill, how far are we going to take it?
Well, that's San Francisco, and I guess we could expect that from San Francisco. But I believe that under Obamacare, in fact, we have a story that we just haven't put on our website yet, where one of Obama's appointees, one of his so-called gay appointees, an open homosexual, urged homosexual activists to lobby for covering these so-called sex change operations under Obamacare. And so you know that you're going to get pressure with these panels that are going to decide what gets covered and what's not. Guess what? The transgender movement, which is picking up where the gay movement left off, they're just the young Turks of the homosexual movement. The transgenders will fight hard to get their sex change operations covered under Obamacare. I think that's what we're going to see.
Peter, let's take a look on its impact to some of these things as well. Now, we just saw Washington State pass what is termed same-sex marriage. Again, that term is an oxymoron because marriage is between people of the opposite sex. But a very shocking story came out of Washington State. A state college there, Evergreen State College, has decided it's not going to prevent a 45-year-old man from lounging unclothed in a woman's locker room in an area that's frequented by girls as young as 6 years of age.
Yeah. Jim, it seems like every time we talk, we're regaling each other with these horrible stories. But in this case, we're talking about the concept of gender identity, which is men who believe they really should be women, or that's what their real identity is, and vice versa. And it doesn't require what we talked about earlier, the sex change operation. It just requires that they feel that they are women. And so in this case, this poor gender-confused man believes he's a woman and believes he has a right under his gender identity to be in a female locker room, and lo and behold, they allow it.
According to eyewitnesses, they said there were girls ages 6 to 18 years of age and not used to seeing individuals in situations like this. But here he is, as we mentioned, unclothed in the locker room there, girls as young as 6 years of age. And the college has ruled in favor of this, as you said, this confused man, saying he's got the right to do what he's doing.
Yeah, they're setting, the college says it might set up some curtains for the girls to change behind. So once again, we see the radical gender confusion lobby being accommodated, and not the protected, not protecting our young people. And this is just a travesty. And I don't know when, if Americans don't rise up now and reject this nonsense, then I don't think we ever will, because when it gets to the point where a perverted guy who believes he's a woman and calls himself Colleen can go into a locker room where there are young girls and not get prosecuted, then we're pretty far gone.
Peter, let's hit one other issue here, and we're about 4 minutes from a break, but I want to talk about corporate America and how they are caving in. You mentioned how through executive order, this is going to force companies, but we were just made aware in the last 24 hours about UPS, United Parcel Service, that late last week decided to discontinue giving support from their UPS Foundation to the Boy Scouts because of their discrimination against gays. Tell us the story, Peter.
Yes, this is another shocker. UPS, the famous delivery company, has decided that it's going to institute a policy that adheres to the same gay non-discrimination code we talked about earlier, which means that only grantees, organizations that have the same pro-gay policies will be able to get money from UPS. Well, it turns out that UPS gives money to the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest homosexual lobby group. It gave $150,000 to the Boy Scouts. I can't remember what year that was, Jim, but it has given to the Boy Scouts. But now under the new policy, it can't give to the Boy Scouts. It says it can't anymore. And so basically the homosexuals who already have tons of money will get more money, and the Boy Scouts will be dropped by UPS.
Matter of fact,
in the name of diversity and inclusion. That's the incredible part, Jim.
Well, yeah, and so, I mean, here we have the human rights, I don't believe that they allow born-again Christians that promote heterosexuality to serve on their board, do they?
Well, I doubt it. These boards these philanthropy organizations are heavily lobbied by the left. And I looked at some of the other grantees. There were other liberal organizations. It seems like they give to many liberal groups, but they did give to the Boy Scouts. But what's so incredible, Jim, is the word diversity you would think would mean multiple viewpoints, many different viewpoints, represented. But what the homosexual activists and the liberals always insist upon is that the people representing the moral viewpoint be kicked out.
Right.
So they don't want diversity at all. They want to discriminate against groups like the Boy Scouts. They're all about demonizing and punishing the Boy Scouts, and UPS doesn't have the guts to say, yeah, we're punishing the Boy Scouts. Instead, they say, well, we're just setting up our own criteria, and we're giving by our own criteria. But, of course, the criteria punishes the Scouts because the Scouts explicitly won the right by the U.S. Supreme Court to give by their own moral creed, which does not include homosexual scoutmasters.
And folks, as people contact UPS, here's a message UPS is giving. What is being reported in the media is largely inaccurate. UPS did not pull funding from the Boy Scouts. UPS did not take action that directly targets the Boy Scouts. UPS did deploy a policy for new grant requests that is applicable to all prospective grantees. The policy states that organizations requesting funding from UPS must attest to having a non-discrimination policy that is aligned with that of the UPS Foundation. And then they say that the exact language can be found on their website on the Focus on Giving link. UPS policy states that we place great value on the diversity that exists within our workforce, our customers, providers of goods and services to our company and the global communities in which we do business. Peter, they said there's misinformation given on this issue.
That's doublespeak, Jim. That's total doublespeak.
Folks, when we get back from this break, we're going to be providing you some contact information for UPS to let your voice be heard. You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America.
A new feature-length film is now available on DVD. Amazing Love is the story about a youth director and his wife who take 5 teens from their youth group to the wilderness for 2 nights to camp out. 2 teen girls have a sharp argument that causes division. Tensions are high. The youth leader gathers all the kids and decides to tell the story of Hosea. Using flashback, the film takes you to Nazareth as the story of Hosea unfolds. It's a story of commitment, of keeping vows before God, of faithfulness and unconditional love. Through November 17th, Crosstalk is making available 1 copy of Amazing Love for a donation of $18, and any additional copies to the same address for a donation of $10 each. 2 copies are available for $28, 3 copies for $38, and so on. The story will impact teens and adults alike. To obtain your copies of Amazing Love, visit vcyamerica.org or call 1-800-729-9829. 1-800-729-9829.
Well, folks, I'm seeing a story here from the Associated Press. UPS stops Boy Scout funding over anti-gay policy. UPS says, no, we didn't do that. Well, we didn't target the Boy Scouts with this. We didn't take action directly against the Boy Scouts. We didn't pull funding from the Boy Scouts. It's their anti-discrimination. It's their policy that discriminates. And we just aren't going to provide funding through our foundation program to any group that discriminates. So, Peter, you call this classic doublespeak.
Yeah, this is corporate doublespeak, and look who the real discriminators are. It's UPS. They're saying if you adhere to a certain policy, which happens to be the Boy Scouts' moral creed, their morally straight policy, which precludes homosexual scoutmasters, and I think most Americans are agreed that we don't want homosexual men out camping in tents in forest with young boys. I certainly wouldn't want a homosexual man, an open homosexual, with my young son. And yet that's called discrimination, and they lose the funding, while the Human Rights Campaign, which has multi-millions of dollars, this hugely funded homosexual group, will continue to get UPS's funding.
Folks, I have a point of contact for UPS if you'd like to let your views be made known to them on this new policy that they've instituted here that is taking funding now, pulling funding from the Boy Scouts because of the Boy Scouts' moral creed that they hold to. UPS Customer Service and UPS Public Relations. The phone number to UPS Customer Service, 1-800-742-5877. 1-800-742-5877. UPS Public Relations, 404-828-7123. UPS Public Relations, 404-828-7123. A number of you have utilized UPS services, and as customers, you may wish to voice your thoughts on their decision to pull funding from the Boy Scouts because of the moral creed that the Boy Scouts have in their policy to be morally straight.
Hey, Jim, I have an email, too, if you want one.
What is that?
PR@ups.com.
Yeah, is that the one I just read a bit ago?
Yeah, it's the email for the PR department. It's just PR@ups.com.
Okay, the email address. Yes, thank you. Yes. PR@ups.com would be the email address that you can contact as well, PR@ups.com. Peter, just before we get to the phone lines, the whole issue is getting even more blurred because there is a group calling themselves the Gay Christian Network. And a matter of fact, they're offering their founder, Justin Lee, to be available to news media to do interviews later this week on this whole concept of why gays are not destroying Christianity, reconciling a gay lifestyle with a profession of Christianity, and why the culture war has become so ferocious and what can be done to stop it. Your thoughts here?
Well, I think the Gay Christian Network should be called maybe the Confuse the Christians Network. What they're all about is, I believe, deceiving evangelicals into believing that somehow homosexual practice, positive homosexual practice is compatible with the Bible. And we know as believers that's patently untrue. The Bible is so clear on prescribing homosexual practice as sin. We see it in Romans 1. We see it throughout the Word of God. We see the possibility of change in 1 Corinthians 6. There were people who left the practice of homosexual sin in Bible times, just like we see the wonderful stories of people today who've left homosexuality behind, who've overcome it with the help of Jesus Christ in their lives, who've been forgiven of that sin and moved on. And yet you see this Gay Christian Movement Network is actively trying to promote the idea that you can be gay and Christian. And I believe it is another temptation that we're going to face. We see a lot of confusion in these days, including in evangelical circles, and he's saying he can end the Cold War by just saying that homosexuality is compatible with Christianity. Well, that's part of the Cold War. We know as Christians we cannot say that homosexual practice is acceptable any more so than we can say that any sin, especially a sexual sin like homosexual practice, incest, or adultery, no sexual sin is compatible with Christianity. How can we say that somehow there's an exception for homosexuality?
Let's open our phone lines here today at Crosstalk, folks. So we're talking about the impact of the 2012 election on LGBT issues, and then even more specifically, its impact already we're seeing on corporate America, where within just days of this election, UPS making their decision to no longer fund or contribute to the Boy Scouts due to the quote-unquote, the discrimination policies of the Boy Scouts. Our number to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. What is your response, folks, to the impact upon this nation, as we have seen, as Peter called, the most pro-homosexual president in the history of this country, reelected to a term, the first openly gay senator elected to the U.S. Senate, voters in Maine, Maryland, and Washington legalizing same-sex marriage, Minnesota voters rejecting the constitutional amendment, an Iowa Supreme Court justice that brought about same-sex marriage in Iowa reelected, and then we see its impact again upon activist groups now that are pushing President Obama to go big on their agenda in his second term. And folks, already we have seen the National Day of Prayer events canceled from the White House, but instead we have in June, a month later, the LGBT celebrations for Gay Pride Month taking place at the White House year after year. Remarks by the president regularly going to the Human Rights Campaign's national convention. We are seeing corporate America caving in this regard, with now UPS, the United Parcel Service Foundation, saying, no way, Boy Scouts, no more funds from us because of the values you hold. What's your reaction to these issues today? Our number, 800-733-9829. Let's go to Joplin, Missouri. Gary, you're on the air.
Thank you for taking my call. It struck me when I heard the reference to Gay Christians Alliance. That's like saying, okay, Christian Alcoholics Alliance, Christian Child Molester Alliance, Christian Drug Addict, come on. Sin is sin. God truly explains what the Bible says about it, and, no matter what label you put on it, sin is sin.
Thank you, Gary, for raising that point. Peter, a comment?
Absolutely. Sin is sin, and we can't make an exception for homosexuality.
Gary, thanks for your call here today.
Thank you.
From Joplin. Let's go next to Bayview, and Mike, you're on the air.
Yeah, I believe they're just opening a door for pedophiles with that guy in the girls' locker room. We can still go to the United States Post Office and deliver a package cheaper than you can at UPS. I say we just got to pray, and, my finger's getting really, really tired of dialing this stuff, and every day it seems to get worse and worse, and I don't see a real end in the near future.
Thanks for your thoughts here, Mike.
God bless you both.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Peter,
can I say something on that, Jim?
Go ahead.
Right after I heard him say the word pedophiles, I opened up to a website called Before You Act. And Jim, we should probably do a whole separate show on this alone. But this is a group, I'm calling it NAMBLA with a PhD. Before You Act is a group of organized pedophiles. They're calling themselves minor attracted persons, and they're using the same tactics that the gay lobby used to win acceptance, to try to win acceptance for so-called minor attracted persons, which would be adults attracted to children sexually. And so even what he said is becoming true, that these movements which are advocating egregious sins are all advocating, they're using our freedoms to lobby hard, and the saddest thing of all is it seems that the forces of sin seem more passionate, more energized with their lies than Christians do to defend truth with all that we know to be true.
So instead of pedophilia, we use minor attracted persons?
That is now the politically correct term, minor attracted persons. The website is beforeyouact.org, with the letter B, the number 4, the letter U, and then ACT. And it's an organized pro-pedophile movement.
My. Peter LaBarbera with us here today. Let's go to New Berlin. And David, you're on the air.
Yes, I have a question. I was wondering if you could answer it. Does anybody have the power to stop President Obama from his executive decisions that he makes? I mean, from his, when he uses executive power.
Well, certainly, if there would be those in Congress that would block it, that is one means. There are those also who can, and we've seen in some cases executive orders challenged within the judicial system as well. A very lengthy system to go through, but the restraint of power has not been there, and we saw shades of this happening in the recent State of the Union address, where he said, "If Congress does not act, I will." But this really brings up the whole constitutional debate of separation of powers, and certainly in my book, this would be something that is fair game for lawsuit, but then we have a judiciary that has been rather activist in that regard as well.
Thank you very much. Keep up the good work, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Jim, I think you referenced, it was one of the guys challenging it was Representative Steve King from Iowa.
Yeah.
But I thought it was sort of sad that after Obama did, and I'm glad you mentioned it because I forgot, his war on DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, I wish that a congressman or a senator would have sued right away on that point.
Yeah.
Because Obama is the president. He doesn't just get to decide which laws he's going to enforce and which ones he's not. And he has launched a campaign against a bipartisan law, the Defense of Marriage Act, which was signed by Bill Clinton in 1996. Obama decides he's not going to enforce one whole part of that law, and so and I wish there would have been a greater challenge immediately to that abuse of power right then.
To Howard calling from Milwaukee, you're on the air, Howard.
Hey there. I can't tell if you guys are serious or not. One caller said that homosexuality was like child molestation. Are you guys serious?
No, he didn't say that, actually. No. He said that it opens the door for anybody, and in fact what I said was that you can go to the website Before You Act. You can see that there's now incredibly, there's a movement of people using some of the same tactics that the gay activists use. They're now using it for this thing called minor attracted persons, which would be adults who define themselves as being sexually attracted to minors. So the fact is, these groups exist whether you like it or not.
Right. I guess maybe on the big picture, isn't this kind of like Islamic extremists saying that anyone that doesn't believe their way should die and all that with the whole homosexuality thing? You guys are serious that this is like you hate it like that? No,
you're putting words in our mouths. We didn't say that this is that. I think the true extremism is more like I think the gay activists are more like the Islamics in that they believe that there's almost no respectable opinion that is contrary to their agenda. Christians aren't saying kill homosexuals. Christians are saying we disagree with their lifestyle, with their behavior, and we don't think it should be considered analogous to civil rights. So you've exaggerated what we've said. We didn't say that, but certainly the intolerance is on the gay side. Why are they trying to why are they encouraging lawsuits against Christians, such as a Christian photographer in New Mexico who simply didn't want to use her talents to photograph a lesbian commitment service? Do you think she should be forced to do that under the law?
No, probably not that. I just think that this whole thing about...
Well, that's what the homosexual lobby is fighting for. And they use a gay rights law in New Mexico. So they're the intolerant ones. They're the ones who are forcing their viewpoint. They are so intolerant that they insist even that Christians or Muslims or anybody who opposes them should be forced to push their to accept their lifestyle, even if it means using their own private business talents and skills. They should use that to ratify the gay lifestyle.
Howard, thanks for your call. We're up against a break. We'll be back in 60 seconds. You're listening to Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12 says, "All who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution." It doesn't say maybe. It doesn't say might. It says they will suffer persecution. My question today for you and for myself is, are we experiencing at least soft persecution? Now, we know that in Cuba and in China, there is hard persecution going on for many who really are believers in Jesus Christ. But for us here in our comfortable country, We certainly should be at least experiencing soft persecution, where people are speaking ill of us or calling us narrow-minded or bigoted or judgmental because we stand for the inerrancy of Scripture, the exclusivity of Jesus Christ. Are you standing up for the gospel in your everyday life to the point that you are receiving soft persecution? I pray that you are, because it means you're contending for the faith. For Worldview Week in Minute, I'm Brandon House.
Folks, we have just witnessed it here with the United Parcel Service, UPS, with their decision not to fund the Boy Scouts any longer through their foundation, the UPS Foundation, because of the Boy Scouts' so-called discrimination against gays. Well, folks, here you can contact UPS Customer Service, 1-800-742-5877, 800-742-5877. Their public relations department is 404-828-7123, 404-828-7123. Their email address, pr@ups.com, pr@ups.com. Peter, as well, if you'd give out your web address where people can get more info on these issues.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Our website is Americans for Truth, all written out, FOR, AmericansForTruth.com. So, and we've got we have a free newsletter that you can sign up for up there as well.
Peter, the previous caller here just before the break were actually saying to speak against homosexuality, compared it to those who are Muslim extremists, the people who brought down the Twin Trade Towers, who saw thousands of people's death here in the United States. How do you feel being compared, because you speak against homosexuality, the act of homosexuality, likened to those who brought down the towers and saw all that loss of life?
Yeah, I mean, gay activists do the same thing. They say, and maybe he was a gay activist, they call us the American Taliban, and they try to make this analogy. But as I tried to say, the real analogy is between homosexual militants and Islamic militants, although Islamic militants are more deadly, of course. But you see, Islamic militants say that criticism of Islam is Islamophobia, and homosexual militants say that if you criticize homosexuality, you're some kind of a homophobe, as if, Jim, you have an irrational fear because you oppose homosexual behavior. It's not irrational. It's completely rational. I've met you. I've gotten to know you. You're a very intelligent guy. You certainly don't have a hateful bone in your body, but you disagree with homosexuality, and yet they would call you a homophobe. This is the tactics that the other side uses. They demonize, they vilify, using these dirty tricks like even semantics.
Pensacola, Florida. James, you're on the air.
Hey, what I'm discerning is all across, and this may go without saying, but there are dividing lines being drawn all across America. And it's not so much necessarily for the unsaved that I'm concerned. It's for the saved that I believe where the real decisions are being made. Are we going to stand up and choose for righteousness and take the persecution as a badge of honor that comes with it and fight for righteousness, or are we not? I believe that's where the real battle lies. The previous caller talked about, radical Islamists, that kind of thing. Trust me, my friend, if and when, God forbid it doesn't, come to America, you will see a clear difference between Christians and radical Islamists. When you see their babies with bombs strapped to their chest going into Starbucks and exploding it, it'll be a horse of a different color between that and a Christian. I guarantee you that. You'll probably end up running, Howard, to a church, begging for the love of God to be evident if you ever come up against that. That's all my comments that I have today. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Peter?
Well, I think the comment he made is so true. I think we're coming to a point, Jim, where it's really the wheat. We need to discern the wheat from the chaff. So many people seem drawn by this gay myth, this gay lie in our culture, and we have to choose: are we going to follow God, or are we going to follow the world? God says that homosexual practice is sinful. It's very clear in the Word of God. The world says being gay, so-called, is an identity. It's who people are, and that's not true. We know that because we've seen so many men and women being delivered from homosexual temptation in their lives. I know so many people who've left the homosexual lifestyle most of them with the help of Jesus Christ. And so Christians have to decide, am I going to stand with God, even if I might be called a name or I might face a tougher time at my job, or am I going to compromise my faith and my witness before God by moving in this pro-homosexual direction? And I hope people see it that clearly.
To Wilton, Wisconsin. Sharon, you're on the air.
Oh, hi. Thanks for your program. Mine is just a call for Christians to educate themselves on the topic of homosexuality according to the Bible. There is a scholar by the name of Dwight Pryor who has a CD set called Sexuality, the Torah, and Grace. It's through jcstudies.com. It's very, very good according to the Bible, and he treats this topic very sensitively and extremely thoroughly. And the people that are for homosexuality, that want it to be normal and say it's okay with God, they come out with a very persuasive argument.
Thank you, Sharon. And Peter's website as well, Americans for Truth. Is that .org, Peter?
.org and .com.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sharon. Willie in Zanesville, Ohio, you're on the air.
Yes. Hello, guys. How y'all doing?
Fine, thank you. Your comment today or question?
Good. Comment and question. I believe that I piggyback off one of these guys that has already commented concerning sin is sin. But I think sometimes we get off on the wrong thing concerning God's work and our work. Our work is to save ourselves from this untoward generation. God's work is to punish those who sin against his word. And what I'm talking about is when we interfere in God's work, like he did with Sodom and Gomorrah, that's his work. I don't condone sexual those acts of men with men and women with women, and God don't either. I don't condone it. But what are you going to do about it? Here's my question. When it comes down to a individual working at a place, a job, whatever it may be, when does his homosexuality come into effect? Does it come into effect on the job or when he's with his partner, wherever that may be?
Okay, thank you, Willie. Peter, you got about 30 seconds.
Okay, well, I'll give you one example. In the schools, if you have a homosexual activist teacher, it comes into effect by that teacher under a non-discrimination law could impose or promote her homosexual or lesbian lifestyle to students, as if just like she could promote a marriage if she was married to a man. And so it does affect all of us. And I would say that Christians need to stand equally in the cultural war. They need to defend truth, just like in our free society, homosexual activists are promoting their lies, using our freedoms. We need to use our freedoms that God gave us in this country to defend truth.
Our time is gone. I apologize to others on hold here today, but we've come to the end of the program. You can get more information at americansfortruth.org and Peter LaBarbera's website. Peter, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Jim. God bless.
And, folks, thanks for joining us here today on Crosstalk as we spoke of the impact of these 2012 elections on the LGBT issue. President Obama is being pressured to do more. Thanks for joining us.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the Internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.